Hello everyone. In today's lab we're going to cover how to submit a clean file. This could be an employer, your teacher, anything like that. So we're going to cover a little bit about proper topology. We're going to delete history. We are going to cover layers, center pivot, and freeze transformations. So this is a simple little lab, but it is definitely important to know. Let me get rid of my poly count because we don't really need it. So with this, I'm going to touch base on proper topology real quick. I know I've probably talked about it a little bit, but maybe not enough. Proper topology. So in this case, I've been showing you how to model with basically all quads, and that's great. It makes it really easy to subdivide geometry. It also makes it easy to use the multi-cut tool when you have triangles in there in places. It's not going to wrap around your edge loops very cleanly. So like here, if I had a triangle in here, let's just build one real quick just to show you. If I use my multi-cut tool to create that, it doesn't know how to split this because it stops right here. So modeling in quads makes adding topology in quads, meaning 4 edges, 4 vertices, one face. Maya really reads this in triangles. That's how it displays it. You know, those whole a squared plus b squared equals c squared kind of equations. Good. Thankfully, it does all the math for us, so we don't even have to worry about it. We just have to worry about the art side of it. But holding Control and Shift, you can see it'll create that full, clean, proper topology, and that's what you ultimately want at the end of your model. If you were to go into gaming or something and you were to import this, you typically, I think game engines can just run it now in quads, but a lot of them will automatically subdivide it into triangles for you. And anyway, no big deal. But proper topology is very important to have, and the reason being is you want to be able to easily work with your file, or if you're working a collaborative project with other people, you want them to be able to easily work on your file with you. So if I click one, I've showed you this before, holding Shift, double clicking the other one. If you have proper topology, it's going to wrap around perfectly around that entire edge loop. The bevels might come out a little bit weird. Maybe not. So it's got even quads here. Let's see if it does it here. I want to start on that one. So that one's going to wrap around the long way. But just to give you an idea, that's how you're going to want your topology to look. If it looks all wonky, it's not going to be a very clean file. But anyway, quads and triangles are perfectly fine, but don't have like pentagons or 5-sided objects or 6 or 7 or anything more than 4, because it actually puts a lot of strain on the program. Maya has a difficult time starting to do the math because it doesn't know where to compute the triangles when you have so much going on. So it can cause a crash on your system. So quads and triangles I strongly recommend. It's really the only way to work in these programs in the long run. So proper topology, you're going to want to keep your model in quads and or triangles are acceptable. I'd like you to try to stay with quads until you get a little bit more into higher detail models. Now, we have the sword. We cover proper topology. Now, the next thing I want to show you, which is also a very important feature, is I want to delete all the history on here. Now, you're going to notice I have all these different sort of objects in my outliner, and it's showing all of these different parts of this particular model, and this might be for the other one. So just to give you an idea, Maya has stored all the information on how I've combined these objects together, and it stores it also in the outliner. The other place you can find all the history on the model is if I click on it, is here in your inputs. It's going to show you your poly soften edge, your bevel, and it names them too. Poly bevel 3, poly bevel 2, poly split 5, poly split 4. It shows you everything you've done to this model up to this point if you haven't deleted the history on it. And your attribute editor actually holds all of this information as well. I'm just right clicking on the far right arrow so I can show you. It stores it all in here because you can actually go back in and make tweaks and changes. And this one I can't, but some of them probably can. And you can change some of these things, which is great later on. But right now we've kind of come a long way too far to start changing these because it'll really mess up our topology in terms of similar to how the attribute editor, when we're subdividing and once we've moved an edge or we've extruded a face or something, going back and changing those attributes really changes the entire model in a very chaotic way. So we've kind of come too far along on this particular model, but as we were working, we could have always gone back. And when you get a little bit more experience, you'll understand how and when, what tools are easy and you can do that for. But anyway, that being said, we want to get rid of all of this extra information that we don't any longer need. We finished our model, looks great, everything's perfect, the topology is great. We just want to make sure we have a clean file. So to do that, we're going to do up here in the top left corner, edit, delete all by type, and we're going to go to history, and that's going to clear all of that information out that we no longer need. You'll see it in your outliner, you'll also see it in your input, and if I click on my attribute editor, now I've only got the core things I need. This is the mesh. Sword combined, this is another attribute that it needs to store to sort of display this object. Your shading group, that's what's showing it as gray right now, basically. And then this is your material, which is what if you were to add textures to it. So it only keeps the core information that it needs to display this object in your attribute editor. Your channel box, let me select this. Now I also, that pretty much sums up the entire delete the history on it. You get rid of all, and that would do it for the entire scene if you didn't have anything selected. I believe it'll even do it for other objects as well, so just be careful if you wanted to keep some information stored. But if you have it selected, it should only do the one object. Delete all by type and under edit, and then history. So that deletes all the history of the object, so we have a clean sort of file and object. Now I want to show you next on the list would be freeze transformations and center pivot. So freezing transformations, I pretty much already have it done, but let's go with like something just to show you. You'll notice I have this object, it's not dead center, and I like to keep my models when I'm importing them into other scenes and stuff right in the middle, but just for a demonstration purpose, if I bring this over and rotate this around and drag it over here, now I've got this sword here, and these are really difficult numbers to work with. So another term that's commonly used with freezing transformations is zeroed out. So what we do is we zero out our translate and our rotate. The scale doesn't go to 0, it goes to 1, so this term zeroed out, but it's called freeze transformations, but a lot of people refer to it as zeroed out. But just to show you, I have this object here, and if I go to modify freeze transformations, you're going to see it freezes or zeroes out all your translate and your rotate. Also, if I scale it, you'll see if I do modify freeze transformations, it's going to bring the scales to 1 and the rotate and translate to 0. So freezing transformations is great, but I just want you to be aware of that. what it is and what it does, and it can be extremely useful. So if you wanted this to, you know, not be under the grid and only be from 0 up, and you wanted it to display like this in your scene when you open it up or anything, you could do modify, freeze transformations. Oop. And now you'll have it right here, all zeroed out, nice and clean. I'll keep mine centered for now. So anyway, that's freezing transformation. So modify, freeze transformations. The other thing I want to show you is center pivot. And centering the pivot, mine's probably already centered, but if you go to modify and center pivot, it is. There's a chance, especially when you're combining this object and this object and that object, that your pivot might end up in some weird place. So if that happens and it starts to become really weird to work with, I'm holding D, by the way, to move my pivot point. So now if I were to scale from over here, it just moves weird, rotates kind of weird, right? It's going to all come from that pivot point. So to show you, if I wanted to center the pivot on here, I'm going to go to modify, center pivot, and that's going to snap it directly to the center of this model, which is great. So if yours isn't centered, make sure you center it, modify, center pivot, and that's how that works. So we went over topology, we went over delete the history, we went over center pivot and freeze transformations. The last thing I want to show you is the layers, and I've actually already showed you this, but I'm going to show it to you again. So I already have this on a layer. Oh, I don't. Now, this is great. I'm glad that's happened. So I actually no longer have this object on a layer as I created in one of the previous videos, lab 3 or 4, on some point during the modeling of this, to separate my two models from it. However, so my box modeling sword is still here on the layer because I didn't work from this one, I worked from this one. On the attribute editor sword here, it's no longer there because I've now combined multiple objects together. I've merged verts and done all this, and everything on this model has now been renamed, and the layer no longer knows where or how to find it because it's been renamed. It automatically renames when you combine objects, and then it renames all the verts inside of it and renames all the edges and all the faces. So it doesn't know how to find it anymore. So let's go ahead and delete that layer. Delete layer, and let's bring this back to 0 and have it zeroed out. And now I'm going to select on it because now I need to create a new layer for it again because it didn't know how to find it last time in the previous layer. So I'm going to go to layer and create layer from selected. I didn't name it or anything, but if you wanted to make any modifications to it, you just double click on the layer, and now I'm going to call it, now if I name it the same, sword combined mesh, it's going to say an object by the name sword combined mesh already exists. Enter a different name. So I always like to add what the actual thing it is. So on the model, I like to add mesh. I could always add model, but I prefer mesh. In this case, it's the sword that I created, with the layer is basically the suffix of the name. And another thing I can do here is I can change the color of my layer, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. And it helps visually separate things for you in your scene. So I'm going to select black on this one and select save. Now it's black here, so now I know this one doesn't have a color. That's typically what transparent means in other softwares. But on sword combined mesh layer, I now have it as black on this one, and to show you what it does, if I do wireframe on shaded, now this one is going to have a black wireframe on it when I'm working with it, or if I have the wireframe on shaded. Now, if I move this over and I turn on my other sword, I could always rename this one, right? Or change the color. So if I double click on it, let's make this one something a little bit different. Let's make this one yellow. And now you can really see the difference if you were working in a scene, which one is on which layer. So just to give you an idea of the benefits of it, you can easily distinguish visually which one is which. So I'll go ahead and turn that off. And then I'll take my sword and move it back to 0 because I want it zeroed out. And that's the benefit of having something zeroed out. If you accidentally, were clicking and dragging and you moved something over, right? Now you know, oh man, you'll know the exact dimension of where it is in the program. So you'll know you can move it to 0, 0, and 0. So that's what it is. And if I wanted to keep this over here, I could zero this out, right? And if I accidentally moved it or anything like that, I can always bring it back to 0, 0, 0, and I would know it would go directly back to the spot where I zeroed out or froze my transformations, freeze transformations. Delete history, layers, center pivot, and freeze transformations. I think I covered everything. Another thing I'd just like to show you, which can be helpful, since I talked about centering the pivot, let's talk about switching the pivot point's location, which I did. Holding D, I'm going to hold D and hold V. So this is a technique that I use pretty often. Holding D and holding V, I'm going to go ahead and move this to the tip of the sword. So now if I wanted this thing to rotate from the tip of the sword, it'll now rotate from that point, which is pretty cool. Same thing, right? Now if I wanted it to pivot from a different location, I'm going to hold D and V, and I'm just going to drag this down, and it's going to snap to any vert I want. So if I drag it from the middle, it'll snap to any vert. So if I snap it to this one, it's now going to rotate at that point, right? But I don't want it to do that. I want to have I want my pivot point to be right here at the bottom tip, right, of the sphere, of the cap. If I hold D and hold V, I'm going to go right to that middle one, and I'm just going to start to drag it around until it looks right. And now I know it's right on that point. So now if I rotate it from here, just for instance, if this was like the face of a clock, or the hand of a clock, the second hand, minute hand, whatever, now it'll rotate from this point, right? So it can be a little joke. There you go. It's a little after 3, right? But that's a really huge beneficial factor of being able to relocate your pivot point. And also, let's say I have the grid, right? Of course, it doesn't display. There it is. And I want it to be at that point. In this case, I'm going to hold X, and I'm just going to shift the whole object up. And now I know it's sitting at dead center origin. This is called the origin of your file 0, 0, 0 on translate X, Y, and Z. Now I know my sword is, the bottom of it sitting directly at the origin of my file. And those are huge benefits to know about being able to move your pivot point if needed. And then again, if I wanted to center it, modify, center pivot. Let's just cover everything. Edit, delete all by type history, modify, freeze transformations. Look at that zero pivot. I don't even know what that does. Let's try it. Oh, look at that. It sets the pivot point to 0. I'm sure if this was way over here, modify, zero pivot. No, I don't know. I'll have to figure out exactly how that one works, but if I modify center pivot, now I have it right there. Maybe it just does that. I don't know. Pretty cool little new tool. Anything that you see in here that's highlighted in green is been added to this year's version of Maya. So if you see something with green brackets and it says something, like this case 0 pivot, I have to actually Google and see, or go on Autodesk's website to see exactly what this tool does to learn about it, because it's the first time I've ever used it. But if you see that throughout, you'll notice, I'm sure they've got some. There's a couple: Bifrost graph, universal scene description. These are new things that I don't know anything about yet because I haven't played around with the new software that much. But not too much has changed in the years of Maya, especially when it comes to modeling. But that 0 pivot might be pretty cool. It might be a nice new little gadget to play around with. Other than that, oh, make sure you name your files as well. That's part of submitting a clean file. Sword combined mesh, in this case, sword mesh is fine. I wanted to rename this so it's not so complicated. Sword mesh. Oh, but I can't name it that, right? It has to be sword mesh layer. And so I just want you to have a layer created for your sword. I want you to have your sword named. I want you to have the history deleted. I want you to modify center pivot. Okay, I want it to be centered. I want you to freeze transformations. You might not even have to, but I want you to try it anyway. And then just make sure that your model has proper topology, and that's how you submit a clean file, right? So that's everything I'm looking for. You can submit your Maya file. You could submit a screenshot, I guess, as long as you have your channel box open, so I can see that you've frozen transformations and zeroed everything out. But you can never, I always say it's better to be safe than sorry. You can always submit your Maya file as well as a screenshot if you want. But other than that, like I always say, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to message me on Canvas inbox. And I hope I was able to answer any questions that you might have had pondering in your head. I also hope you guys reach out to me if you do have questions. I can't emphasize that enough. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. That's what I'm here for. But other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Hopefully we'll talk soon, and stay tuned for the next video, and we'll see you then. Bye.